The phone rang 3 days before my 30th birthday while I was standing in my kitchen, staring at 40 engraved invitations and a row of unopened wine bottles. I had already paid the restaurant deposit, booked a photographer, and reserved hotel rooms for relatives who promised they would finally show up for me. The moment I picked up, my mother did not even say hello. She told me the party was off because my younger sister was having a personal crisis and needed the entire family by her side. When I asked what happened, she said my sister had an argument with her boyfriend and was completely heartbroken. A minute later, a text from my father arrived, telling me that I was the strong one and that I would understand. That single phrase had been used to erase my graduations, promotions, and life milestones for as long as I could remember. My sister had spent weeks complaining that my birthday dinner was excessive, only to fall apart right when the focus was supposed to be on me. Instead of canceling the reservation, I transferred it to a local women's shelter, packed a single suitcase, emptied the bank account my parents could access, and drove toward my late grandfather's cabin. My family assumed I was throwing a tantrum and would return in a few days. They had no idea what was hidden in that cabin, why my mother had spent years teaching me to take second place, or that their decision to prioritize my sister one last time would destroy the life they had built. The cabin stood 4 hours from the city at the end of a private road my mother always claimed was dangerous and practical to visit. Growing up, she discouraged me from going there unless the whole family went together, claiming Grandpa Arthur was a bitter, secretive man who held ancient grudges. In reality, Arthur was the only person in my life who never called me strong when he actually meant convenient. He had passed away 8 months earlier, leaving behind a rundown cabin, 30 acres of land, and years of back taxes according to my mother. She kept insisting we sell the land to a commercial developer and divide whatever cash was left between my parents and my sister, Chloe. Whenever I asked to look at the paperwork, my mother claimed the estate lawyer was still working through complicated legal issues. I chose to believe her, simply because accepting her story was easier than facing the truth about my own mother. When I pulled up to the cabin that night, the porch light was already on, and a man in a dark coat stepped out to meet me. For a split second, I imagined my grandfather walking off the porch. Instead, the man introduced himself as Samuel Vance, Arthur's estate attorney. He looked at me with a sad smile and said my grandfather had predicted I would show up right after my 30th birthday. Samuel unlocked the front door and led me into the study, where Arthur's reading glasses still rested on the desk next to a framed photo of me at 17. Samuel set a thick legal file in front of me, explaining that Arthur had signed a new will 2 years before his death. He had left the entire property, 32 surrounding acres, and a controlling share in a land development firm directly to me, completely bypassing my mother and Chloe. The estate was worth millions, and a resort company had already offered a fortune for the shoreline, but Arthur had rejected them to protect the lake. Instead, he wanted the land transformed into a non-profit art residency, an idea I had sketched out with him during childhood summers. Samuel explained that I took full legal control on my 30th birthday, but until that date, my mother had been granted temporary administrative power over the accounts. When I asked what she had done with that power, Samuel opened a second file showing that over $400,000 had been drained from the estate. My mother had labeled the withdrawals as legal fees and emergency maintenance, but every cent had been funneled into Chloe's rent, credit card debts, failed business ideas, and a deposit on an expensive wedding venue for a relationship that was barely holding together. Samuel had discovered the missing money months earlier and warned my grandfather, who immediately changed the trust so full ownership would transfer to me the moment I turned 30. Arthur knew that if my mother found out I inherited everything, she would manipulate me into signing the control over to her. Stashed at the bottom of the legal file was a handwritten note from my grandfather. He wrote that my family had spent my entire life teaching me that strength meant giving up what was mine, but real strength meant protecting what mattered, even against your own blood. The cancelled birthday was not just an act of coldness. It was a calculated distraction. My mother knew the trust took effect that week, and Chloe's breakdown was manufactured to keep me away from the lawyer while my mother finalized paperwork to categorize the stolen cash as approved family gifts. When I picked up my phone, I saw multiple missed calls from my mother, a message from my father, and 8 texts from Chloe accusing me of being selfish and jealous. Samuel looked at me across the desk and said I needed to decide whether this was going to remain a quiet family issue or become an active fraud investigation. For my entire life, my mother had solved Chloe's problems by forcing me to pay for them. She had spent my college savings to cover up Chloe getting expelled from school, forced me to co-sign loans Chloe abandoned, and used my professional connections to protect Chloe after she was fired. Sitting in that quiet study, I realized I was done protecting people who looked at me as nothing more than a financial safety net. I instructed Samuel to freeze every account associated with the trust, notify the banks that my mother no longer had authority, and save every text message arriving on my phone. The next morning, I walked through the cabin, documenting damaged property, unpaid property taxes, and stacked boxes my grandfather had carefully catalogued over the years. One box contained my childhood artwork alongside an envelope marked for me to open after learning the truth. Inside, my grandfather detailed decades of financial favoritism. When I was 12, he had set up trust funds for both sisters, but my mother drained mine to pay off a private school Chloe had been kicked out of. When I was 16, he tried to fund a design business I started, but my mother closed the account because Chloe complained that my success made her feel inadequate. A financial auditor named Warren joined Samuel at the cabin, and together we mapped out the timeline of my sister's emergencies. Without fail, every time a trust document needed a signature or an estate meeting was scheduled, Chloe suddenly suffered a crisis, like an uninsured car accident, an eviction threat, or an unverified medical bill. An email recovered from my grandfather's computer revealed a message Chloe sent to my mother 3 days before my birthday, asking if the plan was really going to work. My mother replied that I would be angry, but I always gave in, and that once I signed the updated legal papers, they could replace the money later. Chloe responded by asking what would happen if I asked about my grandfather's company, and my mother simply answered that I had no idea I owned it. My family intended to cancel my birthday, use Chloe's drama to wear me down emotionally, and slide legal forms in front of me while I was too exhausted to read them. Those papers would have given my mother voting control over the property for another 5 years, allowing her to sell the land to developers, cover up her theft, and give Chloe a massive payout. My instinct was to scream at them, but Samuel warned me that striking too early would give them time to prepare a legal defense. I needed them to believe I was still the obedient daughter who would come home and fix everything. When my mother called again, I answered and made my voice sound tired and defeated. She immediately scolded me for making my sister feel guilty, but then she asked me to come home for dinner over the weekend because my father needed to discuss minor paperwork regarding Arthur's estate. There was no apology and no genuine concern for where I had been for days, only a demand for my signature. I told her I would think about it and hung up the phone. Over the next 2 weeks, I stayed at the lake house working alongside contractors, reviewing corporate balance sheets, and hiring an environmental foundation to protect the surrounding forest. I also reached out to an art school director to design a formal residency program on the site, finally turning my creative passion into a real career without needing anyone's permission. Chloe called me repeatedly, starting off with tears before flying into a rage, demanding to know why I was punishing the family over a simple birthday party. I told her the situation had nothing to do with the party, which caused her to go completely silent before crying that I did not care what happened to her anymore. I calmly told her that I had simply stopped sacrificing my own life to save hers, then hung up and blocked her phone number. 6 weeks after my birthday was cancelled, I walked into my parents' house wearing a professional business suit, carrying a leather briefcase filled with legal documentation. Samuel waited in a car down the street while my father opened the front door, offering me a tight hug and calling me his strong girl. Inside, my mother had set up a pathetic make-good celebration, placing a grocery store cake with 31 candles on the table, while Chloe sat in an oversized sweater looking visibly fragile. My mother set a legal document right next to my dinner plate, telling me we should get the boring paperwork out of the way before eating. I opened the file slowly and asked my father if he had actually read what he was asking me to sign. He looked away awkwardly, saying my mother handled the finances, which prompted Chloe to slam her hands on the table and accuse me of acting hostile. I looked my sister in the eye and asked her when she first discovered that Grandpa Arthur had left his entire company to me instead of her. My mother tried to step in, claiming my grandfather was confused in his final years, but I reminded her that he had passed 3 separate medical evaluations when he updated his trust. I laid out printed copies of the bank transfers, showing $416,000 shifted into accounts tied directly to Chloe. My father stared at the numbers in utter shock, turning to my mother demanding an explanation, but she angrily countered that the money belonged to the family and that she was only trying to protect everyone. Chloe lost her composure and screamed that I had manipulated our grandfather into giving me everything just by visiting him when he was sick. I set the printed email chain on the table, and my father read his wife's words out loud. She doesn't know she owns it. The room turned dead silent as my father realized his wife and daughter had staged the entire birthday crisis to steal my inheritance. I turned to my mother and told her the accounts were permanently frozen, her authority was revoked, and the land sale was officially cancelled. I offered them a single choice. They could sign a full confession, return every piece of stolen property, and step down from the estate, or I would hand the file over to the district attorney for felony fraud. Chloe jumped up, shouting that I was destroying the family over money I did not need, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that she felt entitled to everything I owned. My father walked out of the house without saying another word, while my mother scrambled to collect the papers, claiming I was being overly emotional. I placed my hand firmly over the file, told them that my silence was over, and walked out the front door, leaving the unsigned contract sitting on the table next to the untouched birthday cake. Over the next few months, the legal fallout tore their carefully constructed world apart. My father filed for divorce and turned over years of personal tax records to Samuel, revealing that my mother had been using estate funds to finance her social status and pay off Chloe's endless debts. Chloe lost her apartment, her leased sports car was repossessed, and her fiancé called off their relationship after discovering she had lied about her personal wealth. My mother was forced to surrender the family home to repay the trust, moving into a small rental apartment while facing public embarrassment from the local charity boards she used to run. I chose not to post about the situation online or seek revenge through social media, letting the formal court documents tell the story. A decade has passed since the night my birthday was cancelled, and the lake house property has been completely transformed into a thriving art center with studios, cabins, and a permanent gallery overlooking the protected water. I spend my days directing the center and painting, finally living a life built on my own terms rather than my family's demands. True strength is not about how much pain you can quietly take for people who misuse you. It is about having the courage to walk away from them and build something that actually lasts.